By the way, we are not feeling nice that what we haven't, but it's okay. Yeah. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, first runners up is who? Who is first runners up? First runners up is him. What is his name again? Rune. But are you the guys opposite our stand? Yes, these are our neighbors in our stand. Africa destinations. Give him a big round of applause. Yay! You face this side and look at these cameras. Look at these cameras as you smile. Yes. Okay, greet each other. Look at the cameras again. Yes. And ladies and gentlemen, the winner for Kahoot 2025 Mice Africa Mice Expo at the Sarit Center. Put your hands together for drum rolls. Yay! What's her name? Elsie from which company? Naila. Dahlia Safaris. These travel agents know these things. Oh, and Dr. Elias. This is not fair. We're events industry, audio, events agencies. Next year we come and beat them. And we make sure they don't win. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much, KQ. Because of time, guys, we need to go to this panel very fast. That was very interesting. So I'd like to call someone who has a name. Oh, he's already there. The man who is seated has a name that sounds like he's from Cuba. His name is Nicanor. Nicanor, spelled Nicanor. So I prefer calling him Sabula because it's easier to say. He's the CEO for KATA. Let's give him a big round of applause. He's already sitting there. We have from KQ, our airline. He's a commercial manager, KQ. Put your hands together for Martin Njoroge. And we have my friend who fixed us a flight last minute to Rwanda. We were going to Rwanda. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. Sales Jennifer Njuguna. And who is moderating this? We have the director, Destination Africa. Put your hands together for Rune Engstrom, who is the chair and the moderator for that. He was also a winner in it. I think I'll give you my microphone. I don't see another microphone, so take mine.
Good morning, everybody. I'm honored to be here and chairing this. I just first say a few words who we are. Destination Africa was started more than 35 years ago by Duncan sitting there. 12 years ago we started up in South Africa, and I'll go to this quick because we are running late. We see a big possibility in intra-African tourism. There's a lot to do here. There's a lot of money and there's a lot of problems with visas, air tickets, and lots of things like that. So we also see that we are all partners here. The hotels, destination management companies, travel agents, airlines, we are all in this together. So I'll cut this short and start with my questions. My first question is to Martin. Let's begin with the reality. Why is it so expensive to fly in Africa? Like a few months ago, I flew from Oslo to Cape Town, and Duncan flew from Nairobi to Cape Town. Why is he paying much more to fly from Nairobi to Cape Town than I fly from the north of Europe?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rune, for that good question. And I know this has actually been a curious or question that most of us have been having in this audience as to why, I mean, distance within Africa, you have to stretch yourself to beat the cost of the air ticket. Maybe just to allude to some of the factors or some of the facts, and I would like also maybe to go back to even what Nick was trying to allude to in his earlier presentation. what you realize in Africa, one, the cost of operating an airline in Africa and actually operating within the African space is very expensive. And in this, I will allude to some of the facts that we have in place, even as Kenya Airways as an airline. And just to point out, one is the operating cost. So what you realize, and the biggest cost that play in when it comes to aviation, one is fuel. And you realize African continent, we don't have the same accessibility to fuel as to other continents or other players in other continents. When it comes to maintenance, as I mentioned in my previous conversation, you realize we still rely heavily onto the Western market to be able to maintain our regional aircraft, and that by itself, obviously also going into play is our economy of scale. So today, as an African airline, you know, on average, besides the two big airlines, probably Kenya Airways, Rwanda, ET, most of the African countries actually are operating a very small fleet, which will be amounting to maybe 3-4 aircraft. And that you have a lot of limitation when it comes to economy of scale. You'll not be able to procure that particular equipment at the same price or the same proposition to someone who is actually making an order of the same aircraft, but focusing on maybe a bigger fleet. And again, when it goes also in terms of cost, again, our infrastructure is also plays a very big role into that. So, like, just to give some perspective, when you look at an airport like Dubai, for example, it's actually manned by DINATA, and the airport itself has a lot of amenities besides the runway and the airport operations itself. So the airport is able to generate revenues that actually are able to sustain its cost of operation, and it even goes beyond to developing and actually opening opportunities for that particular infrastructure. Now, when you compare that with our African airports, I mean, we are only limited to landings and takeoff, and that's what every government is actually relying on. So, just a case home here, so when you look at KAA, where do they get much of their money? So, obviously, they are relying on airlines that are actually operating within the Kenyan space, and that limit the much that they need to maintain those particular airports. And because there are no other amenities within the infrastructure, then that cost eventually will be passed on to the passenger, and obviously then making the coupon value within African space to be more expensive. Just also maybe to give some perspective into some other facts, when you look at what we call the cabin factor, or the loads on an aircraft, in Africa we actually play at a cabin factor of 70%. When you compare to Europe, US, and other parts of the world, the average cabin factor is actually on ranges of 86, 87 to 90%. Now, what does that mean? So, basically, obviously, when you're operating from point A to point B, there are natural fixed costs. So, if a capacity or a fleet capacity of 100 in Africa, we are only able to scoop 70 passengers on average, it means that for you to meet the fixed cost, then the distribution is just within your 70. Well, then you go to the other broader aspect of other continents and developed countries, so then you realize then that scale and differentiation is not the same matrix. And there are so many other factors to play. And maybe just also lastly, I just want maybe to highlight something like infrastructure again. I think also research shows that in Africa, out of all the African countries, sub-Saharan, only 35% have what we call paved runways, And that by itself, it means even though we have capacity as KQ and some of our bigger carriers within Africa, there is a lot of points you are not able to fly because the infrastructure does not cannot support your equipment. That will usually lead to less competition, constrained demands, and the fewer who will be able to make it to that point obviously will probably be costly in terms of their pricing. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, just maybe, but just an oversight of what is it that is making point to point within Africa more expensive compared to other points around the world. And there are many. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And to Nick, from your members' perspective, in corporate and leisure, are you seeing growing interest in intra-African travel? Like, do you see any special obstacles when it comes to packaging or promoting regional trips, especially for MICE? And I know we have the visa issues with a lot of countries. So what do you see can be done to increase intra-African tourism?
Thank you very much. I think when you look at the statistics and the numbers that every country releases, in Africa you realize that the top attraction or destination, top source markets for most of these countries, you realize that it is within the region. So you look at the Kenyan numbers and you realize that the top source market, other than the US now is Uganda and Tanzania, and vice versa. I mean, you look at South Africa, you'll still see the same. So that tells you that there's a lot of huge potential for intra-Africa travel. And so I was looking at the top destinations for Kenyans, traveling out of the country. And of course, you'll have the UK there as number one, then Dubai number two, and then you find that Uganda and then South Africa, those are the top destinations. So there's a huge demand for intra-Africa travel. However, the biggest hindrance to this one has been the issue of visa. A lot of us are still struggling to access visas to other African countries, and therefore that becomes a hindrance. Number two is the whole issue of cost of travel, and I think Martin has elaborated that very well. I would like to go and experience Central Africa or Gabon, but just accessing some of these markets become very, very difficult. So that's an issue we need to look at, because it's holding back a lot. And then number three is also the cost of our African destinations. It's cheaper for me to holiday in Dubai than it is to go for a holiday in Mombasa. It's much more expensive to go to Kigali than I will go to Thailand. You understand? So I think we also need to look at how do we price our products. Otherwise, I see lots of potential. There's a lot of interest in intra-Africa travel. And I hope that with the coming in of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we are going to unlock some of the hurdles that are existing, particularly in terms of free movement of persons. So I hope our governments can address the issue of visa accessibility. But I also hope we can be able to build alternative infrastructure, because as Martin mentioned, the hurdles around air travel sometimes go beyond just equipment and airlines. Others are completely infrastructural challenges. The loads are still very low, but perhaps we can begin to explore other alternatives. We are building these corridors on road transport. That can help open up certain regions. Maybe thinking about railway connections. I think that's another opportunity to be able to open the the continent. So, yes, the next frontier of African tourism growth is going to come from intra-Africa travel and tourism.
Thank you. The next one is to Martin again, and I'm going to cut it a bit short because you went through all of it in your presentation, like the collaboration among African carriers, what can be done to get it easier through interlining, co-chairs, things like that, and to strengthen the MICE and business travel between hubs. You went through a lot of this already in your own presentation, so I'm just cutting it short there.
Yeah, thank you, Rune. I think you, as you have mentioned, I think, the message here is African carriers need to come together instead of disintegrating. And to what Nick alluded to, our solution is basically having open skies. Just a case into perspective, for instance, if you look at what is happening within the ecosystem within Africa, politics, protective regulation policies are actually hindering the grid connectivity and possibilities and efficiencies. And just a case example, for example, today, it is easier to do a flight between Nairobi, you go to Bujumbura, then Kigali back to Nairobi. But because of border protection, political play, then you only have to operate independently, where you have to run a schedule independently to Bujumbura back to Nairobi and to Kigali back to Nairobi, whereas actually Bujumbura and Kigali is actually more or less a domestic center. So I think collaboration, fifth freedom, open skies, and maybe just to what I highlighted, I think as KQ, we all know because there is a delay to that coming into play within Africa, we have made deliberate efforts to make sure that besides our grid or the connections of 35 countries or points within Africa, we have made a deliberate effort to be part of partners within other African carriers. And just to mention a few, North Africa, we have Morocco, we have Egypt here, West Africa, we have Alliance, World Airlines, and to the south, we have South African Airways. And all these are African carriers where we are trying to collaborate and actually work together. And just maybe home, we have Jumbo Jet, and also within the region, we have Precision. So a lot is to play, and we are making it an effort just to make sure we as KQ, we are partnering deliberately, effortlessly, just to make connectivity within Africa as smooth, short, efficient as possible. And that then fits well into us as an aviation sector enabling MICE within Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick again. Visas. I can start with an example of myself with a Norwegian passport last year. I wanted to go to Arusha, but I wanted to fly. And I applied, I was in Kenya, I applied for a Tanzanian visa. It took approximately 3 weeks to get an answer. And everybody tells me, but you get it on arrival. It's not that easy anymore because the airlines don't accept you if the system said you need a visa. And they even suggested that I should go to the country I live in and apply from there to get the Tanzanian visa when I'm in Nairobi. And there's a lot of paperwork and different strange systems. And I work a lot with South Africa, and Kenyans and Ghanaians can come as they want now, which has, the traffic has exploded. While other countries, they want to send groups like 100 people, 200 people, they don't even get answers from the embassies. Kenya has done a good job with the new system there. So congratulations to Kenya there. But what are the major hurdles you see with all these visa problems?
It's true, visa regimes are very restrictive here in Africa. And I guess it's also just a global problem because, and I engage a lot with government agencies to try and understand, besides revenues, many of us think that visas are for revenues, but also there are issues around internal security that governments, use a visa to be able to restrict access into their country. So visas are going to be challenges, going to be a challenge in Africa, and sometimes when you look at them from the eyes of the security agencies, but what we've always argued is, let's not have a visa regime that restricts, out of 10 people, 10 good people because you're trying to stop 2 bad people. I guess there's a way we can structure our visa regimes that allows us to sieve the bad people, so that the bad people don't even leave their countries, and allow the rest of the good people that actually just want to travel. So there is the issue, of course, visa reciprocity, and that's why we feel very encouraged when we see countries like Kenya and Rwanda and I think Ghana now open up, and particularly open up to the Africans that are traveling into those countries. But they will need additional support, I think, in terms of, you go to Kigali, for instance, the way they've deployed technology just to be able to work around their internal security issues, I think is something that it's admired. So it needs a bit of investment, and we therefore will call for investment in terms of security measures that ensures that visa accessibility becomes less of a problem, right? But I will tell you for sure, when we sit down with governments, their biggest problem is not because they want to raise money, through visa. It's completely because of internal security management, and that's why even for Kenya, ETAs are free for all Africans, but not for Somalis. And I've sat actually in the room with the people at immigration, and they're like, we do not just want to have that headache of having to deal with the internal security issues, and that's why I say, give us a bit of room. We do our own sieving of internal security. So that's actually the biggest problem in Africa. It's not so much because people don't want to come into your country, but it's because of the real danger of insecurity that actually these countries face. So it may be a problem that will linger around for a while.
Thank you. The next is for Jennifer, and this was also brought up in your presentation. In Europe we have open skies. Whoever wants to fly can fly. Breeds competition, and the Yamoussoukro decision and the single African air transport market. There are no open skies. And what can be done to change this? What's holding back the implementation, and what can change it? I mean, this decision was signed by 44 African countries in 1999, and nothing has happened as far as I know. What can we as an industry do to push these politicians to do whatever they have signed up and say, yeah, we'll do it?
Thank you very much. I think to begin with, Nick in his first presentation covered this topic pretty well. So he took us through how it started and where we are at in terms of the countries that have come on board. And if I remember, I think he mentioned we are at 35. But even if we are at 35 of those ones who have come in to accept this, how is it, are they really implementing what it states? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. Because in my opinion, what really lacks is, number one, the fact that we are still competing among ourselves as African nations. So when you look at an African carrier, a national carrier in Africa, they're first protecting their own space. And in essence, we become competitors with each other. So that, I would say, is the first thing that really is an issue, because we do not sign up to it and work together as African countries to be able to elevate our aviation industry. The other issue that I think is a problem for Africa is the infrastructure, because we could have airlines that want to thrive and people whose trade and economy allows them for that. But do we have the right airports that will be able to, take care of that expansion? So that becomes a major issue as well that I believe the African continent needs to prioritize the aviation industry, because with aviation thriving, then you have trade, you have people getting exposure and going out there. And even as we talk about within intra-Africa, I also think there's a problem on domestic as well, because you could have several airlines competing with each other on a domestic level, and they nip each other's butts. Like, for example, for Kenya Airways, we started the Mogadishu route, and there was serious wars there. There were price wars where you're not able to really sustain, because you have these local airlines who are Kenyan airlines, but you cannot compete with them fairly. So there's an issue there about being able to operate in a competitive environment and thrive at it, and everybody gets their kick. So there's some regulation that is needed in there in terms of how to be able to compete fairly first. The other aspect I think about when it comes to that, and especially the domestic area and also intra-Africa travel, is how do we enable citizens to be able to know that they can actually travel? How are we able? Because when you look at Europe or the West, you're able to buy a ticket way in advance and pay a very minimal amount of money. Why? Because the culture allows them to know that they can actually travel, meaning a middle or low, even middle level income are able to use flights. For us, we haven't come to a point where we know that we can actually plan and purpose to travel by air. How do we create that culture of knowing that, someone working in Nakuru for the government, for instance, is able to pre-plan their travel for next year over Easter, and be able to take their family to Mombasa, because they can buy less if they start planning early. And one of the things that we are working at as KQ, it's actually an initiative that is in the oven at the moment, is coming up with a product called Lipa Pole Pole, whereby you can secure your flights and pay kidogo kidogo. So that way it enables all of us to be at a space where you're not taking a loan and paying more for travel, but you're able to plan yourself to be able to plan that way. So I think such little steps to changing culture will enable us know that the African community is ready. I mean, we have the numbers. Why shouldn't we be using flights to go to the destinations that we want to, and at a more convenient way, and be able to plan in advance? So that's basically what I would say. And the other recommendation is basically for stakeholders to involve government, because we are not able to make steps without the goodwill of government within. What is it that we are able to do in our space? Like, for example, the MICE organizers, are you in spaces where you're dealing with Magical Kenya? Your space is there. Sit properly in those conversations and be able to push your agenda. For all our sectors, can we get the government to work at what they're supposed to work at? We have different MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. Let's use them to be able to elevate our positioning in the aviation industry and be able to get their support where we need their support. I think I'll leave it at that in terms of what I would say are the hurdles and also the way to work around it, even as we look at the open skies, where the easier movement within the continent is going to help us a lot. And for instance, maybe just to build on that, and I know Nick had mentioned that earlier, for South Africa, we got the open skies last year around, I think it was September. And when we look at our stats as Kenya Airways, we saw a skyrocket in terms of inter-travel